I'd like to call to order the Monroe County Board of Elections meeting for today, September 2nd. And I would like to resume our meeting from recess and ask for the approval of the minutes that were sent out and posted. Karen, could you call the roll?
Okay, we're approval of the minutes. Shruti?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Hal?
Yes.
And the minutes have been approved as read.
Okay, thank you. Under old business, we're going to first deal with some outstanding fines that we've been dealing with. The first one, I'd like to ask Nicole Brown to give us status on the Valerie Houghton fine.
My status will be short and sweet. Her Honor came in a couple of days ago and did pay the agreed upon amount. And so the issue is a closed matter. I didn't get to see her. I was in a meeting, but we appreciate her taking care of that. And Mr. Hal, I appreciate all that you did to work with her to get things lined up so that she could pay that prior to this election board meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Karen, do you have a status on the Ryan Maloney fine?
There has been no update.
Did we send that? Did we send that with a return receipt or?
Yes, we did.
And did we get a receipt back?
No, I did not.
Okay. In that case, we'll go after some other avenues to track down a correct address. Usually they will return it if it's undeliverable, but
That is true. It did leave through the clerk's office, and so I could double check with Tree if she heard anything, or with Kat, but to my knowledge, we have not gotten anything. No, we have not gotten anything confirmed.
okay. Pending no action, we will seek other avenues to contact him and make sure that he gets an official contact. Now, the third item on Section A of the agenda is the establishment of a policy for all future fines. We have policies that determine how much the fine will be based on the history of the fine itself. If it's a first notice, generally there's no fine. If there's a second notice, generally there's no fine. If there's a third notice, then a fine is instituted, which is a portion of the total fine amount that is potentially available. And the fines are determined by the state of Indiana. This is subject to Class A misdemeanors generally for most of the offenses. So we want to make sure that we deal with this in a legal and proper manner. In order to do that, we want to make sure that everyone is fairly notified of their responsibility to close the open issue and to resolve the fine. So I would like to recommend to the board for their approval today that we institute a policy to add to our existing policy, which says once a fine is levied against a candidate or a candidate's committee or any other person involved, that that fine will be put into a letter notification with a return receipt or a certification that it has been received. And this guarantees that the person has fairly been notified of their responsibility. Can I ask for a second on that?
I will second.
All right. And Karen, could you call the roll?
Okay, all in favor or voting for the addition to our penalty requirements that a letter will be sent to that candidate who has a late fee. Ruthie, what's your call? Shruthi?
Yes.
And
Nicole?
Yes.
And Hal?
yes. All right.
Passed.
So,
May I ask a question on that?
yes,
So I'm assuming this letter is signed by either the board or a representative of the board?
yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
And it will be done within 7 days,
Okay,
which to me is good business practice.
yeah.
Um,
So, but signed by one board member as a representative of the Board of
Once
Elections?
the board takes action, the chair of the board can represent the board in notifying the individual, I would think.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay,
So chair drafts the letter and it goes on the letterhead and it goes out.
Yep.
And the clerk's office can mail it for you, just so you know, so.
sorry. What was that?
I said the clerk's office could mail it for
Oh,
you.
yes.
The clerk's office is happy to mail it for you. And just to put a bow on this, the reason that it even became an issue, I'm hoping everybody can hear me.
Yeah.
The reason that it became an issue, I think, is because we counted on the good faith of someone from the election board letting the candidate know, the candidate taking ownership and coming in and addressing that matter. And we found out this year the hard way that even though that was happening, there was still some discrepancy. And so I think that this just puts a nice bow on what we were already doing and just hoping that the candidate would take ownership and settle the matter in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, now we have a business process that we can follow to make sure that fines are paid in and the person it's assigned to is duly notified. All right. Karen, could we have an update on the potential voter fraud allegation?
That also is at a standstill. I have not heard anything more from the state police detective. So I am assuming that until they turn it over to the prosecutors, we're in the same place. So if I haven't heard, and I have talked to the prosecutor's office, asking them from the last meeting to keep us informed, and they said they would gladly let us know if anything moves forward on that or whenever they get any more information on it.
Okay, and the last status was they were preparing to sit down, the state police were preparing to sit down with the subject of this investigation and their lawyer and have a discussion.
That's what I understood, and don't know if it's happened or not.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is there any update on the statewide voter list maintenance card mailing? Are we still getting any feedback from that effort?
We're pretty much done. I got my first cards that have been rejected from their vendor. Actually, it was sent to me yesterday. So I got 10 boxes. They're not huge, but those are just cards that I'll keep for about 2 years. That we just is the runoff of this.
When you say, when you
They were
say,
undeliverable.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be good if we need to cross-reference with registered voters or I assume these people were registered and that's why they got the card. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
And we were under the assumption that all of the cards would be scanned in from the state. We found out yesterday that the vendor of the state did not do all of them. We're not really for sure why, but I went through and picked out some of these and double checked, spot checked, and a lot of them were scanned in so we can see them, but not necessarily all of them.
Okay. That confuses me.
Well, it did me too. So I'm not really for sure why the state basically allowed the vendor to make a choice not to scan them in.
Okay.
But But we're on schedule, and obviously we have the cards. And those people have moved, apparently. I mean, they're not deliverable, and they've been sent 2 cards, so.
Okay.
So what is the next step on those registrations, Karen?
They have been made inactive,
Okay.
and so we're done with that.
All of them, or just the ones that the vendor scanned in?
It's a mix. It's not really that really doesn't have anything to do with them
Okay.
being scanned in or not. But I would say we've processed all of them as they've come in, and I don't believe we've gotten any. No, I think we have had a few, like a handful of them this week, but it's really piddly. We're really getting down there to nothing.
Okay.
And it should be. There was a deadline already that those cards should have been returned last Friday.
Okay. So they have all been flagged in the system if one of them tries to vote.
Correct. Well, and then if they're inactive,
And
if they're inactive, they vote, that's fine. We'll just
Then we
reenact.
reactivate.
Yeah, they just move from inactive to active, so it does not affect their voting, and it won't for a while.
Okay,
So
but
they
that
still have-
requires an ID check and a verification of new address, right?
Or if it is their old address and they just somehow or another didn't get their card and they come in and they've
Yeah.
lived there, they get
Yeah.
to.
Okay, but it requires an action by the voter to reactivate.
Correct. They need to vote. They need to ask for a change of address. They need to do something that tells us they're there.
Okay. Very good. Very good. If we're, is there anything else you wanted to say about that, Karen?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, thanks for following up on that.
Sure.
It was good information. The next item on the agenda is the election board logistical needs, and we have guests from the Monroe County Board of Commissioners who would like to make a presentation at this point to the election board and to the audience.
Hi, everyone.
I do.
Yeah.
This is Julie Thomas from the Board of Commissioners.
Hello. My colleagues are also on this call. So we have Lee Jones and Penny Giffins, and Angie Purdy is going to present some information within this as well. She's going to start her slideshow. I think it's important to begin with sort of how we've organized our ideas for the space needs discussion, because this is so important, and we know it's important to everyone on this board and everyone in this community who votes. So it is a vital part of what we do. We really have this separated out into 2 parts. This presentation, the first part is about early voting, because that has been taking place at the Johnson Hardware Building at the Election Central office. And we do understand the issues that are there. Of course, we support accessible elections. We want to do everything we can to make elections accessible, to maximize voter convenience, to limit or eliminate long lines, to make it more convenient for voters. We believe will be to provide multiple locations. And then we're going to talk about the other space needs as well. So we've heard a lot of discussion about the 2020 election and the long lines. We believe that there was just not sufficient space at the Johnson Hardware Building, and to expand the size of the building to another floor doesn't offer you more assistance in terms of providing room for voters. It is, if we had 22,000 people in line over the length of early voting, there's one door in, there's no elevator. We're still going to have long lines, even if you had a second floor, because we still have the first floor. But granted, there are some processes that were taking place in the main floor of the building that we will need to address. that is part of what we're talking about today is this early voting situation. And we know that vote centers and early voting satellite sites help increase voter turnout. We know this nationally. We know this in the state of Indiana and various counties. We had two clerks from Knox and Vigo who had attended our commissioner meetings, and they provided some information that was really helpful for us. But we have a Johnson Hardware building that has 2 floors, as you know. The second floor, this is really for edification of the viewers. The second floor is being utilized by community corrections. We cannot move community corrections at this time. They are providing so many functions every day that are so important that we cannot do that. We really believe that what's needed here is, and the other thing I will note, besides the fact you have 1 door in on the main floor, is that there is no elevator between the first and second floors of that building either. And that is something that will take up more square footage. We believe that, as Professor Rana pointed out at our meeting this week, that this national issue, that there's just not enough, there's not enough accessibility, can be alleviated by looking at providing a number of convenient and accessible voting locations across the county, both satellite voting and for early voting and for vote centers. Angie, do you want to talk about community corrections?
Sure, I can do that. As we've been kind of streaming through the slides, just would like to point out that this was information provided to us by the North Circuit Court and the Chief Probation Officer, Linda Brady. And the point that we're trying to make here is the number of people who actually use this facility and the support systems that are actually in place to help some of our most vulnerable people who are having difficulty in this community. And so I'd like to kind of highlight some of the items that happen there. First of all, the staff, probation officers, frequently go to the Justice Building to report to a court hearing or to respond to a judge's request for information. We also have the people who are sentenced to a term of probation who have to go from the court directly to the probation department. And our probation is already kind of split up in that there's some in Curry Building as well as this Johnson Hardware Building. But most of the programming is actually occurring in this particular building, and that programming is taking care of our specialty courts participants. It's taking care of, in some instances, anyone who is provided a pretrial release. Sometimes they have conditions that they have to meet, and so they have to go from the sheriff's department to community corrections to get things set up. We have a number of community agencies that actually interact with the community, with our personnel, not only the probation personnel, but the participants in the court system on site to help them, make it easier for people to address the concerns that they may be having. So just wanted to kind of highlight that there's a lot of things going on in the community corrections component of the Johnson Hardware Building, and that every day there is somebody, there's more than one person, there's a number of people who have to traverse both from the community corrections building to the Justice Building and vice versa. And then the other thing to say is that community corrections uses this building 24/7 in the sense that they are open on the weekends for anybody who has to provide day reporting. So I think that kind of sums up what's going on, I hope, help you understand what's all going on in that building. I mean, it's pretty amazing the things that we have operating in one relatively small building. So Julie, that good for you there?
Yeah, So we are committed, if you wish to continue use the current space in Johnson Hardware on the main floor, voter registration, ballot processing, and or voting. But it's clearly not enough space. We acknowledge that it's not enough space. Angie had some conversations with the Knox and Vigo County clerks after they attended our meeting and said, hey, if you have questions, let us know. And Angie was gracious enough to take some time and they were gracious enough to have conversations about voting and how they operate. And so Angie's going to share some of that information with you.
Okay, yeah, and both of these entities were really helpful and very supportive of you guys and also our commissioners in being able to help you. Some of the things that were of interest is that Vigo County, which has a population of 107,000 plus, they have 3 vote centers for early voting, and they add an additional 5 vote centers. They are a vote center community. They add an additional 5 vote centers the last 7 days of voting. And then they actually added additional, and I have them here. Yeah, they have additional vote centers that they add on actual election day. So this is a community that's much smaller, that's smaller than ours. And yet they have 3 sites for the month prior to for early voting. Then they also have they have 5 additional, so it's 8 sites available for their community to vote early in their community. The other thing is, you know, there's been this conversation about everything has to be in one place. You know, I will note that when I spoke with Vigo County, they advised that they actually have a warehouse that's off-site, and that's where they keep all of their voting equipment. It is staffed, however, it's not staffed by all of their election staff. And I think that's kind of it for Vigo County. They did say that they went to the vote centers in 2013, and they absolutely love them. They said that their community loves them, and their voters, they have seen an increased voter turnout as a result of the vote centers. So then I also talked to the gentleman from Knox County, and he was also extremely helpful and really super knowledgeable. They are moving to vote centers next year. And so previously, what they have done is they have, they've had basically the one site that they provide for voting. It's not in their office. It's actually in an old jail, Sallyport. He also shared with me that they have these high density cabinets that they store their equipment in. And I was hoping to share a picture with you because he shared it with me, but I still haven't received it via my email. Anyway, they have a lot of different ways of handling problems. So like, for instance, last year with the pandemic, they actually borrowed a tent, put it on the courthouse lawn, ran a cable through a window or multiple cables, and had voting on the courthouse lawn. So they were able to, you know, spread people out quite easily that way. The other thing he said, now they have a population of 36,000, and next year they will have to have 2 additional centers, vote centers for voting. And so they're actually going to have 3 early voting centers in Knox County for 36,594 people. I kind of want to go back to the vote center situation just to kind of point out a few things as to where they're having these vote centers. There's a shopping mall. There's solid waste management, Boot City, just to kind of hit some of the high ones. That's with Vigo. And then Knox, they also have some interesting ones. They're using fire stations and Eagles Lodge, things of that nature, just to kind of give you an idea as to what they're doing there. So yeah, they were extremely helpful. This gentleman, Mr. Shelton, he has expressed to me that he is willing to assist us in our assessment of our space needs. And so I just wanted to put that out there for you guys. And that's all I have on on the two counties that had spoken to us at our
Okay.
commission meetings.
And Angie, could I interject one question here?
Sure,
Are all of those sites ADA compliant?
I didn't ask that question. I think they have to be, don't they?
They have to be, but that doesn't mean they are.
Well, I understand that, but I believe that they have to be. So I would presume, and given Mr. Shelton in Knox County, he is on top of this like there's no tomorrow. I would feel quite comfortable in that all of his sites are ADA compliant, but I can't say that unequivocally.
We can always ask and send you
Yeah,
that answer.
definitely.
Yeah, and I will point out before we talk about space needs for administration, I just want to point out that indeed it's entirely possible that satellite early voting may require more staffing. The council should be asked if they will provide that. I know Councilmember Deckard is on this particular meeting. He's joined, so if you have questions, I'm sure he would be happy to answer them. There is an election fund that the council has set up. Current balance of the fund is about 1.4 million with 400,000 appropriated so far in 2021. And of course, with on-demand printing, satellite locations are feasible because all ballots do not need to be printed in advance. So that's a change from previous elections with the new equipment. The long lines in 2018 were due to not having enough ballots printed, but again, there's no reason that should ever have to occur again. So let's move on to outside of voting space for early voting. Let's think about all of these other parts that have been addressed in the information provided to us by the election board. And that is that there is, for example, ballot processing and storage, training, and then voter registration. We won't really talk too much about voter registration because obviously you already have that office, but if a new place is needed, we can figure that out. So we made space available in 2020, but we believe it was underutilized. We worked with election staff to provide convention center space that was used, but also ballot processing space that was really underutilized, we believe. We ensured there were computers, that there was a door lock that required both a Republican and Democrat ID to get in. We provided tables and we're ready to go. So it's disheartening to hear that these things were done out of the back of a truck when we don't believe that was necessary. There was a conference room in Johnson Hardware that was utilized, but we would have found a way to provide space somewhere else, Showers Building, Convention Center, et cetera. And things have really changed at the Showers Building since 2018 because we now own the parking lot and we did not own it before. So that's an important thing to remember if you're thinking about the Showers Building. So with that, yes, so we have some processing options. The Showers Building, we currently have, we will have in 2022, 2,700 square feet that we can dedicate to Election Central and, for example, for ballot processing. That number, we can provide additional space in subsequent years, and that could be permanent or temporary because we are moving the Highway Department out of the Showers Building, and they hold a great deal of space as well. And again, we now own that parking lot, a very different story. It is ADA compliant, there's an elevator, et cetera. The Napa Auto Parts Building is another option we came up with on the corner of 3rd and Walnut. It is about 5,000 square feet, and the back of the store sort of has you can see that little crow's nest there. There's a sort of a mezzanine level as well for storage. You see in the back of the store along the whole back, but it's about 5,000 square feet, a ton of parking. This may be a good place to utilize to process ballots. So we wanted to present both of those items. For both downtown. Both items are downtown. Both buildings are downtown. Both have plentiful parking. And as for storage, one of the other issues, this is the current, what we understand currently, and we may be off on this. We currently utilize 560 square feet in the showers building for storage for elections, and there's 400 additional square feet in Ellettsville in the storage locker. We can add some high density shelving, and Angie found this online. It isn't necessarily what is being used in one of the other counties, but we would be happy to explore putting in some high density shelving in that unit and making it a permanent storage area that could really be useful for elections. So those kind of high density storage, rolling cabinets mesh together. So classroom space, it's interesting because when Angie spoke with these county clerks, they are typically doing training somewhere off-site. And if we think about 6 to 10 weeks of training every 4 years, it would not be a responsible thing for us to dedicate space that sits empty the rest of the time. However, most counties do use schools, fire station, township offices, community buildings, churches, and other buildings. We kind of had a little brainstorming session and named all the places we could think of in Monroe County. And downtown, we can help with things like showers building, meeting rooms, convention center, and the courthouse Nat U Hill room as training spaces. We can dedicate those spaces and ensure that they are arranged in advance. So we're happy to do that. But all of those are not all of those that we know are downtown, but there are many other spaces around the county. If you have election workers from Indian Creek Township or Bean Blossom, you want to be able to have them go to a training where they don't have to drive all the way downtown. Again, we didn't really talk about voter registration because it seems like there's enough space for that now where it is. And again, we're happy to leave that main floor of the Johnson Hardware building for whatever you think you want to use it for. You might want to do satellite early voting and use it for ballot processing, and then leave voter registration there permanently. It's really up to all of you how you want to do that. So really it comes down to sort of the last question here. We know it's not ideal to ask people to go to different voting locations, but with redistricting, that might happen anyway. And voters are used to getting told to go to different voting locations. That could be because a building's not available or it's no longer ADA compliant. Very good reasons to move voting locations. And voters adapt, and they have adapted in the past when this has happened. So we would ask that you consider taking action to increase accessibility, convenience, and flexibility, and creating satellite early voting sites for Monroe County that are dispersed across the county. Again, we know that the costs may be higher. We know the costs are lower when you do vote centers versus precinct voting for the general election on election day. But we do understand that the cost can be higher for satellite voting. We're happy to go with you to the council and talk about these needs. I think the council would like to hear from the election board about what the needs are, and now is a great time to do it. And we'd like you to look at vote centers, because this will be a benefit not only financially, but especially in terms of convenience, accessibility, and flexibility for all county residents. So they're not having to go downtown. Lastly, the Knox County Clerk was kind enough to offer to assist us with looking at our available space and maximizing the space, looking at shelving and all of these things. And we would really like to bring the clerk in to talk through all of this and learn. And we are committed to providing whatever we can in terms of high density shelving or whatever it might be. We're on board with you. We are with you on this, but we cannot in a nutshell, we cannot lose the top floor of the Johnson Hardware Building at this time. So I don't know if Councilmember Deckard wants to speak, but we'll be happy to take questions. My colleagues might want to add something.
Yes, well, I'll just mention that I had just a few minutes this morning and did a small amount of research and found that Lake County has 6 satellite early voting locations spread throughout the county geographically. Porter County has 5, St. Joe has 2, LaPorte has 4, and Hamilton has 4. Some of these counties are bigger and some are smaller than we are, but they have all found it very useful to have satellite voting locations.
Councilor Deckard?
If it's okay for me just to make some quick remarks, I was trying to figure out where my raised hand was. We're this far in and I still can't get it down. I just want to start off and I want to thank the election board and the clerk and all the workers and the volunteers we don't even know about and families that made the 2020 election happen in a pandemic. Good heavens, hopefully we never have that again. Obviously, as a former state election planner, I always said, and I'll say it now, that we always have to think about those things and certainly adapt. And you've certainly done more adaptation than you probably have done in 10 years. The comment I'll make with my council hat is that I think the county council has, and I can't speak for them all, but I think the sentiment always is, if there is a need that the clerk and the board of elections identifies in a plan that they want to present to the council to ask for support, I know that the council will give that a very serious look and figure that out. We do recognize that space needs is a discussion between the election board and the commissioners, and there are many different balancing hats with that. And along those lines, I do want to say, in the time that I spent with the state of Indiana, and for those of you that do know or don't know, I was co-director for the state election division. I was one half of the bipartisan administration of that for, I think, 4.5, 5.5 years. It's been a little bit, but one of the things I spoke out a lot in that job was queue management, because you are not unlike, as you know well, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, you are not unlike a grocery store. The difference between you and a grocery store, some grocery store is going to stay open for 24 hours and you do business from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And who knows how many folks are going to be coming through your lines. One of the things that state law does offer under the bipartisan, it takes a unanimous agreement of the election board, and rightfully so, we have bipartisan election boards. One of the things it does offer is a vote center system and a satellite system that is designed and agreed upon by that full board. So every component. The risk with that always is that puts the pressure on you to make the right system for you. The good thing is it does allow you to make the right system for you. And that can be a two-way street. I would argue you've been doing queue management and adaptation now for about 1.5 years. And the thing that I always think about with that, people getting through processes, is that I always think in the county, I know that as an at-large councilman, I have 148,500 constituents. They are all over this county, and they're coming from different portions into voting locations. The good thing about that law, as I was talking with the clerk about, she knows full well about all of this, is that really the law allows you to reach those voters through early voting that's designated as satellite, and with vote center locations on election day that you choose. And literally, now the law might have changed a little bit, so always double check my words. Don't take that as gospel, but the law does allow the current precinct system that we have, it would allow for that to be the vote centers. Theoretically, that would mean any voter within our borders that is a lawful voter would be able to vote at any of our locations. Now, that might not be a direction that you want to go, but I do want to say that among all the headaches that you have, and they are considerable and they are many, and I'm sure they are keep you up and are awful at times, among the many that you have are options to look at early voting satellite options and vote centers, particularly around something I call the pressure cooker, and that is that election day. If we can take any pressure off of election day activities or even early voting locations, if one location is getting inundated, certainly that is a consideration. Again, with my council hat, I know that we want this to go well. We want it to go well, and we want to be supportive of an outcome that you and the commissioners come to. And I appreciate your generous listening to my long-winded words, but thank you so much for thinking about all this and doing what you do. This is so important for all of us, and we just appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much. Was there anything else on your presentation?
Looks like Commissioner Githens has something to add that I might have missed.
Okay, absolutely.
Well, I don't think you necessarily missed anything, Commissioner Thomas, but I think that there is, with the current setup, I think that there is a little bit of a parking problem with the single site for early voting. And I think that adding satellites locations would really relieve some of that, especially for people that require handicap parking. There have been a number of times when we've all heard some anecdotal stuff, and I anecdotally have heard that people drive down to early voting, they can't find parking, and so they leave. And that's not what we want. That's another form of what others have referred to as voter suppression. And in fact, I also want to bring up the fact that if we go to vote centers and have the on-site printing with those, I think we'd save on paper, we'd save on ink, we'd save on people leaving because they're waiting for ballots to be delivered. We might even be able to reduce some of the staffing that's needed for runners that are required to take extra printed ballots out to places. And we did have a problem in 2018, partly because printers broke down and those kinds of things. I think that the Monroe County voters actually were very, very flexible in 2020 when we reduced the number of polling sites for the primary election. We reduced them, I think we cut them in half. I was out that day handing out masks at a couple different locations to voters, and nobody seemed upset at all about the fact that they were at a place that they hadn't voted at before. So I think that that's important to note, that our voters were very flexible. They were proud of the fact that people within the election board figured out a way to make it possible for them to vote. So I was pleased about that. And finally, I have to say, I was disturbed to hear that people worked out of the back of an unsecured truck around Election Day. I think if we are concerned about ballot integrity, that really opens up a can of worms that we really don't want to see happen, and especially given that we've had space available for everybody to work out of. So I am in line with Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Jones. I would really, really like to see an additional satellite center or two, and I would really urge the election board to go to vote centers. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do want to commend the election board again. I know we said this in the spring, but we do want to commend you again for really making sure that voting was accessible and the process was fair, and you did such a great job in 2020, and we all learned to adapt during the pandemic. But in this case, we have a little time and we have a few options for things that are administrative. And we are so excited to work with you to find those solutions. So let's keep talking and let's figure this out. And if you have questions, just let us know.
Great. Are there any questions from the board right now? All right, you've given us an awful lot to think about. I'd like to ask Angie Purdy if she could send the presentation to the board. She can use the distribution list on the note I sent yesterday with the updated agenda on it. And that would be great. And then we can begin to dig into this and study it. Again, any comments from the board? Yes, Shruti Rana.
Hi, it looks like my raise hand function isn't working. It's on, but I don't think you can see it.
I don't have the ability to lower hands, so.
But I first wanted to say to the commissioners and council member Deckard also, thank you for joining us today and coming here, but also for your presentation. And I guess I wanted to share some initial reactions and thoughts, and I think we can discuss it, as our chair mentioned as a board and come back to you. But I did want to give you some big picture concerns, right now. So I guess just to start with, I was a little bit concerned with the framing of voter convenience and suppression, or inconvenience and suppression. And the reason I'm concerned about that is yesterday at the commissioners meeting, I spoke about the recent Supreme Court case that came out this summer, Brnovich, and that specifically uses the language inconvenience and convenience. You're allowed to inconvenience voters of color and specifically target groups. And so I think that, I'm hoping that that was unintentional, but that language I think can be quite dangerous and, can and will be used against people in Monroe County, when or if our legislature acts to impose, actual voter suppression requirements, right? And we all know that what is inconvenient to one person is suppression to another. So I don't have a problem walking 500 feet or 3 blocks if I need to, but somebody else might. And what's an inconvenience to me, could entirely prevent someone else from voting. I guess the second kind of big picture concern that I had is I really appreciate, consulting.
On an election board meeting. Do you have one? I can.
Barry, could you meet, please?
I'm trying.
Okay. I know that Zoom meetings always have all these different little technical snafus. So, okay, so I was moving to my second concern. So I was saying that I think it's a really, I appreciate that you consulted other clerks about what's going on and working well in their counties, but I'm troubled at, I hope there's not a precedent being set of, our clerk represents our county and is intimately familiar with what goes on in our county, and what might work well somewhere else may not work here. What works well in Ohio may not work well in Indiana. And I think, we owe deference to our clerk to determine kind of what fits our community and our county the best, given all the differences in the different counties. And then the third point I wanted to raise is about vote centers. And again, sort of a big picture concerns. I'm quite familiar with vote centers and they have pros and cons, right? So we've talked about the pros, but they very much also have cons, particularly in red states where they can be used as an excuse, for example, to limit voting locations under the guise of convenience or under the guise of letting, people from different regions or areas come to a specific vote center. And most of these things also require bipartisan support. So we haven't seen any I didn't see any representation in what you gave us about bipartisan support. And I'll note again that the plan that we as the election board presented and the request of the our county clerk, Clerk Brown, did have bipartisan support. So that is a very significant hurdle, in these polarized times to achieve bipartisan support for vote centers and where they would be located, especially that they be located in ways that actually support and not suppress the vote. And so, so I think, as I said, vote centers have both pros and cons, which need to be considered quite carefully, but I'm concerned that we don't rig the debate in advance. So if the way that this is being set up is that vote centers is the only option, then the game is rigged, right? Because you're forced to turn to that as the solution and just deal with whatever the cons are and hope for the best, as opposed to thinking about what is actually the best option for Monroe County, right? So I wanted to raise that also. Then the next concern I wanted to raise about the examples you provided about Vigo and the other places. Again, I think it's wonderful to see other counties doing really great things and having things work well, but I don't think we should rely on examples where things are in different buildings when we know for a fact that that increases security and ballot integrity concerns, right? Every time you have to move ballots, it's very expensive. You need to have, different people, you need to have security, you need to have all of these requirements, and just adding different places where ballots are moved, both increases the cost of maintaining that security and integrity, but also provides additional openings for bad actors to either question the process or actually interfere with the process. So, and these are things that, we know that this national environment is changing and we need to be aware of that going forward. So, so I think there's quite significant kind of security and transparency concerns in using these different locations. I know some of them have already been brought forward, but I think, there's possibly many more. And then what I was going to say also is that I also appreciate the very detailed presentation about what happens in the probation center and all the wonderful work that they're doing, which we know is also quite crucial for our community. We did skip through the slides a little bit quickly, so I can go back and review it later. But, I did see a lot of wonderful work that they were doing, but I didn't see anything that was building or location specific, particularly not anything that could happen across the street or, a couple of 100 yards down. So, so that was a concern that, that I had as I was looking at the slides. But again, it was kind of gone through pretty quickly, so I couldn't look all the way through. So, so I guess those are my big picture concerns for now. As our chair said, I really want to take all of this under consideration and think carefully, but I'm just really concerned about sort of the patterns that are being set in terms of consultation outside of Monroe County, not our particular representatives. And also, that, we don't want to be forced to make lemonade out of lemons, right? We want to come up with the best options that we can and then kind of work around those, as opposed to saying, well, here are the lemons, do what you can, and let's hope for lemonade, given all of the things that are going on. So I'll pause or stop there, I guess, and take all of this under consideration, but I'm also happy to answer questions if needed. Thank you.
I'd like to say something too, if I may. I too would like the opportunity to digest what we've heard today from the commissioners. I appreciate their making time to be on our meeting. I want to stop something before it even gets out there as a rumor and be very, very clear. There was never a ballot in the back of a U-Haul truck. This is how rumors get started. This is how things are misrepresented, not unlike what you see on national television with respect to the integrity of the elections. The PPE, the protective personal equipment that was supplied by the Secretary of State, we had so much of it that it overflowed, and we left the U-Haul truck in front of Election Central so that we had plenty of PPE for our poll workers, our voters, our regular people. Please do not let any Monroe County voter misinterpret what was there. Never, never, never was there a ballot in the back of a U-Haul truck. My staff worked out of the back of the U-Haul truck to keep the number of people inside the building to a limit because of the governor's executive order. Otherwise, they would have been in that building. And I just want to clear that up right now because that's incendiary. We just can't have that. And with that, I'll also ask for time to digest what we've heard in this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so we will be establishing some work meetings as an election board to digest the information and determine what is going to be best for the voters of Monroe County. And we'll do that in conjunction with our respective parties as well. Is there any other conversation from the board or from our presenters on this issue?
I believe our attorney, Jeff Cockrell, has a comment he'd like to make. His hand's raised. Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Oh, thank you. I'll lower my hand later. I just wanted to, much like Clerk Brown, I wanted to just make a point of clarification. I think when we talk about the movement of ballots and security, I think that is always going to be present in any thought or any plan that occurs. I think you look at the election laws, which allows some precincts to be combined, but they have to be within a certain amount of distance. So I think that while that is a great issue, I think that's an issue that you guys are concerned about, irregardless of what type of structure you use.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Are there any other comments on this issue?
Thank you again for letting us present today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. We greatly appreciate the information and the presentation that we'll be getting in the mail. And we're looking forward to sitting down with you and discussing the results of our assessment of this information. Thank you. Okay. With nothing else on this topic, let me just touch base with Ms. Nicole Brown. Did you have anything additional you wanted to add about space assessment?
Other than the fact that I have been on the Commissioner's Weekly agenda and will continue, or have someone else in my stead continue, as Ms. Shruti did yesterday. I thought she made a very powerful presentation, and I appreciate you agreeing to present in my stead when I have to be away at a couple of conferences. And so I don't have anything to add at this time, other than the discussions continue, and we will continue to press our case going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right, then, being no further business in regard to the election board logistical needs, we will move on to the Board of Elections policy on public meetings, which was attached to this agenda. This was first distributed at the meeting last week as a draft. I have received no updates or corrections from any of the board on this. So I would like to ask that we now do a roll call vote on accepting the Board of Elections policy on public meetings. Karen, could you call the roll, please? That's okay. You're on mute. Still muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Now,
Yes,
finally got it.
there
Karen,
you
good.
okay.
I was clicking on it, but it didn't want to listen to me or something. Okay, so all in favor, Shruti,
Yes.
Nicole Brown,
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Hal.
Yes,
All right, the ayes have it. The motion passes.
the policy is now adopted and will be followed. Thank you. Karen, at the last meeting, you brought up the fact that there were some precinct inputs that were requested by the state. And could you briefly touch on what those were and what the results were?
Are we talking about the Richland 1, 2,
Yes.
and?
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
Okay, we just have Richland 1, Richland 2, and Richland 8 that we have split into town and county, and they will never be county. They will always be town. And so you gave me the approval to go ahead with that. I submitted a county authorization form or request from the state. They gave it back to me. It takes a little time sometimes. And so now I have the approval to go ahead with the state in regards to that. So it has not been done, but it is in
Okay,
motion.
this was a task that we were given by the state with a deadline, correct?
Oh, not this one. This
not
one
this
was
one,
just,
okay.
yeah. It just would eliminate 3 different ballot types. I won't have to do the Richland 1, 2, and 8 county, and there will never
Right.
be a reason for a county ballot.
Right, got it. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So that has been resolved. And the last item under old business, re-precincting review, that was due on August 11th.
Correct. And
Okay.
I got that done thanks to the great guys that are working over in the surveyor's office, and Jared did a great thing. And just to remind you that we have 71 precincts right now out of 82 that will have changes. Most of them are minimal, but there's a few that perhaps a precinct line went through a building and that's going to be cleared up. Most of them were slivers and that type of thing that needed to be done.
These were geographically based changes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So perhaps there might have been a demarcation down the middle of the street and now it's moved over 1 block or something of those along those lines.
Right. Actually, we like it down the middle of the road, but
Okay.
you know, sometimes they're over to the side. Now we got that little sliver of piece of land that doesn't
Okay.
have a voter, but it doesn't also have a designation to a precinct.
Okay.
And my understanding that the city 10 years ago did a great job of cleaning theirs all up, and somehow or another the county didn't. Different people are in positions now, and so I don't know what happened, but now it didn't really affect any voters, but it will make our precinct lines so much cleaner. And at this point, maybe that's all we're going to have to do. I don't know. We had a conference last week, and the state is telling me that it's highly likely from historical past that we may not have a lot of changes with our districts and such. There's no guarantee, but we won't know until probably the end of, or sometime in October.
Mhm.
Things have to go through the House and the Senate and then the governor, and then we get it. So if they leave us alone and don't do anything, especially our congressional district, we really want to stay 9 and only 9 in Monroe County. That just helps so much with voters, and with them moving from one congressional district to the other can be it's more complicated.
Okay.
If we don't have any, then we just have the 71, which is still a lot, but it's going to be okay.
But on the effort that you concluded on the 11th, no voters were actually moved as a result of that effort. It was simply a cleanup.
I would say that is probably, I can't say for sure that 1 or 2 won't get moved, but I don't know of any
Okay.
at this point.
Okay. And at the commissioners meeting this week, they did call for the formation of a committee to begin looking at precincting, re-precincting. So once that committee is formed, then they will begin the effort as soon as they get the green light from the census that we have all the information we need. Okay. Is there any other old business to be brought before the board? Okay, seeing no additional old business, I call for new business, and the only new business I have on here is public comments. So I'm now opening the floor to public comments. Andrew, could you give me the authority to lower hands?
Yes, just 1 minute.
Thank you. Yep, that worked. Okay, if you would like to make a comment, I invite you to raise your hand at this point. Okay, we have 1 hand up. I can't seem to see whose hand that is, though. Yes. Ms. Gotti, please go ahead. Let me unmute you. Please unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you.
there
Thank
go.
you.
Good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Thank you so much. I'm Ami Gandhi. I'm with Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where I lead our organization's nonpartisan voting rights work for Illinois and Indiana. But despite having Chicago in the name of the organization where I work, I'm actually a Monroe County resident. My family and I live here in Monroe County. And I wanted to share a few thoughts today about my concern for voting conditions in Monroe County and the need for expansion of voter services. Really appreciated all of the insights shared during the course of today's meeting. And because I have memorialized my organization's concerns in a letter, and also because I've had the opportunity to speak in other public meetings, I'm going to try to keep it short today. And I wanted to reiterate the concerns that we hear from voters in Monroe County and across Indiana, but including right here in Monroe County, that are called into our nonpartisan 866 Our Vote election protection hotline. We hear concerns that have a lot to do with the physical space that's there for voting and for election administration. And that's very concerning to us. We don't mean to place blame, because when voters and election authorities have strong lines of communication, there are instances where these problems can be solved real time so that they don't result in disenfranchisement. But the threats of disenfranchisement are unfortunately all too present. We hear questions from voters time and time again, including in Monroe County, about confusion about voter registration status, questions about absentee ballots, questions about long lines, and going to the wrong in-person polling place, questions about provisional voting, early voting, incorrect notifications of signature mismatch, questions about voter ID barriers, disability access and health issues, and inquiries from college students wondering whether they are permitted to register and vote. Our organization has a special focus on racial equity concerns and threats to voting for eligible citizens of color. And I wanted to share, based on some of this discussion today that I find concerning, that disenfranchisement or suppression of voters does not occur only by poll taxes or literacy tests. Calling long lines or lack of space a mere matter of voter convenience fails to take into account the unique challenges faced by voters of color, voters with disabilities, and other marginalized communities, especially given the historical context of elections in this country and in our very community here. What might seem like mere inconveniences can actually make all the difference between whether someone feels like it's feasible to follow through with the challenging process of voting and accessing the ballot, or whether they abandon voting because it becomes impractical or exclusionary. As my last point, on a related note, I'm hearing that there's a consideration of transitioning to a vote center model in Monroe County. I would caution that such a wholesale change to Monroe County elections should not be implemented without careful consideration of how it will affect all of Monroe County's voters. While a vote center model may help reduce costs in some ways, such a drastic change should not be instituted without first conducting a race equity impact analysis on what might be the unintended consequences of this model. There can be repercussions of changing and removing familiar polling places. And presuming that a change in voting procedures, like a shift to vote centers, will make voting easy, accessible, and safe to all community members does a disservice to those communities whose voting rights have historically been overlooked or forgotten. And we're happy at Chicago Lawyers Committee to stay in touch as a resource and stay in conversation about the implications of these different changes to the election system. I think about voting all day long as a voting rights attorney, but I have to say, I can never imagine what it would be like to be a county clerk in the 2020 elections or another very challenging, important elections in recent years. And so I really have a lot of admiration for the election board, for our county clerk, for the firsthand experiences they have with administering important elections, and look forward to hearing more from their rich information and experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. 3, 2, 1. Okay, there are no further hands up. Then I am calling for, first of all, to make an announcement that our next county election board meeting is scheduled for October 7th, Thursday at 1 p.m. Do I have any motions?
So, Mr. Howe,
Yes.
technically we'll all be together on the budget Zoom meeting next Wednesday.
Yes.
And prior to our next official election board meeting, but I will make a motion to recess rather than adjourn so that we can return to the budget hearings next week. Thank you.
Can I just jump in to say that I see some people's hands raised and I don't know.
That's fairly recent. Okay, that's Barbara Bowling. Okay, I have recognized her.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for the late hand raise. It took me a minute to try to locate the feature. I do appreciate you giving me the opportunity. I am Barbara Bowling Williams. I am the state president of the NAACP, and certainly I have an interest in, what happens, around the state. And certainly we do have a branch there in Monroe County that's headed by Reverend William Vance. So certainly I, jumped on the call for this meeting so that I'd have an opportunity to kind of follow some of the changes that are being considered, and also to make sure and ask that any kind of changes that you're planning, that they be communicated to the voters in a timely manner so that they have an opportunity not only to weigh in on them, but to also be prepared for them to make any adjustments that are necessary. And one of the things that certainly is of concern to our voters is the fact that there were several people who had been on the rolls for a long time and, suddenly weren't on there anymore. And that certainly was, due to the purge that was taking place and initiated by the Secretary of State's office. And so there were people who were illegally purged before and didn't know it. So by the time that they found out about it, it was too late to re-register. So, we're working on that, trying to encourage people to check their registration because they may have been purged illegally before the court entered its injunction to prohibit that process. But again, I thank you for the opportunity to allow me to make comments, and I look forward to further information and engagement by the board and the NAACP.
Great, thank you. And thank you for reminding the board and all participants in this effort that we need to get outside opinions as well to make sure that everyone who's involved and who will be affected by it will have a chance for input. Thank you.
Mr. Howe, may I respond to Mrs. Bowling Williams?
Absolutely.
I hope I said that right. I think I got the name correct. Mrs. Bowling Williams, this is Nicole Brown, your Monroe County Clerk. First of all, I just want to thank you for jumping on the meeting and weighing in. But I want to be very clear, as your Monroe County Clerk, we do not purge voters here in Monroe County, and I cannot imagine. I have frequent contact with my 91 clerk brothers and sisters, and we do not purge. There is a process if you have not voted to reach out and see if you are still receiving mail at that address, if you're still registered, if you haven't moved. You can imagine in a university community, a lot of times students will register so that they can vote and then move without updating. But I also wanted to reassure you, when I first became clerk after being caucused in 2016, my team and I actually went through the registration in Monroe County to make sure that no one had been purged who should remain on as a voter. I can only account for what goes on in Monroe County, but I want to reassure you, we take that very, very seriously. We check, double check, and triple check to ensure that everyone has an up-to-date voter registration. And I also remind people, particularly around election time, to make sure that early and often you get on indianavoters.com and check the status of your registration. And I hope that the NAACP and other groups will join me in getting that message out. You have to check it early and often. Mistakes do happen. We try to catch them in real time and correct anything certainly that's on our end. But it's just important to me that you take that away from this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown, for your response. I appreciate it. And we will continue to inform our members to check their registrations early and often.
Very good. Thank you. And now, Abby Yang, you would like to make a comment? Please unmute. Yeah.
Yes. First of all, I just wanted to thank Clerk Brown and the election board for all of the hard work that they've been doing in Monroe County to make sure that our elections go smoothly. My name is Abby Ang. I'm a member of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. I'm also the vice president of Monroe County National Organization for Women, and we've been following what's been happening at numerous commissioner meetings as well as this one. And I do urge you all to take into account what Ami Gandhi and Shruti Rana has said about the concern about voting centers, and especially the language around inconvenience versus suppression. And that's really all I have to say, but I'll be continuing to follow this issue.
Thank you. And now, Natalie Galvin.
My name is Natalia Galvin.
Natalia, excuse
yeah,
me.
that's okay. That's okay. Hello, my name is Natalia Galvin, and I'm a resident of Monroe County. I'm also the 9th District Chair of the Indiana 9 Latino Caucus. I have been recently attending commissioner meetings around this issue. We are following it very closely. As it is a voter suppression issue, we are disheartened by some of the conversations, but thank you for your time today. I find today at today's meeting, I found Commissioner Thomas and Ms. Purdy's presentation problematic. And I say it because of the disrespect given to our clerk. Whether intentionally or not, this presentation highlighted the disregard of the expertise and elected position of Clerk Brown. We've elected Clerk Brown to make these decisions. She's not an appointment, she's elected. As a private citizen who has done extensive outreach with early voters, including for some races that our commissioners have run, moving locations confuses voters. It is a voter suppression issue and should only be done under extreme circumstances, which this is not. While something like an hour-and-a-half wait might be an inconvenience for me, it's a voter suppression issue for people who have daycare to worry about, who have limited time, who only have 20 minutes to figure out when they can vote. And I think that those voices are missed. I'm very disappointed in this entire discussion and the way that our elected clerk has been dismissed and discredited during this entire process. And I hope better for our county and the community I live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any other comments? All right, seeing no further hands and no requests to comment, I can now entertain the motion to recess.
I will make the motion to recess.
I'll second.
Okay, Karen? Would you like to call the roll, please? Or would you like me to? Okay, there you go.
Am I on?
Yes.
This is so much fun. Shruti.
Yes.
Clerk Brown.
Yes.
Hal.
Yes. So we are now, the meeting is closed and we are in recess, subject to recall by the chair. Thank you.